There are mornings when the silence in a house tells you more than any conversation ever could. It doesn't announce itself with a fight or a slammed door. It just settles in, quiet as frost on a window pane. And you sit there with your coffee going cold and you understand, maybe for the first time, that the child you gave your whole life to has stopped seeing you as a person. I spent 38 years as a licensed electrician in Savannah, Georgia. I pulled wire in August heat that would drop a younger man to his knees. I climbed into attic spaces so tight my shoulders touched both walls. My hearing isn't what it used to be from the generators. My left knee was rebuilt twice, and I would do every single bit of it again. Because every dollar I earned went into raising my daughter right and making sure she never had to fight the same uphill battles her mother and I did. Welcome to a story about what happens when you love someone more than they respect you, and what it costs everyone when that truth finally comes to light. My wife Donna passed away 5 years ago from a rare autoimmune condition that took her faster than any of us were ready for. She was the kind of woman who kept a notepad by the bed and wrote down things to be grateful for every single night, even at the end. The last real conversation she and I had, she looked at me from that hospital pillow and said, "Ray, don't let Cassie struggle. She bruises easy on the inside, even when she doesn't show it." I carried those words like they were folded in my chest pocket every day after that. My daughter Cassie was 26 when she met Derek Whitmore at a fundraiser gala in downtown Atlanta. Derek was a management consultant with a firm out of Buckhead. He wore good shoes, knew which fork to use, and spoke in the polished, practiced way of someone who had been coached to sound important. Cassie was dazzled. I understood it. She was young, and Derek was confident, and the world he came from looked nothing like the one she'd grown up in, the one with the second-hand furniture and the careful grocery lists, and the father who came home smelling like electrical tape and sweat. They married 14 months after they met. It was a beautiful ceremony. I wore a rented suit and I cried when she walked down the aisle, because that's what fathers do. What I also did, quietly and without any ceremony at all, was call my financial planner, a steady woman named Harriet Cross, the Monday after the wedding. Cassie and Derek had found a townhouse in a suburb north of Atlanta, a beautiful 3-bedroom in a development called Ridgecrest Commons. The HOA fees alone were $400 a month. The mortgage payment was $4,300. Derek was pulling in a solid salary, but he was also carrying business school loans and a lease on a BMW that cost more than my first house. Cassie was working as an office manager for a dental practice, making about $52,000 a year. I ran the numbers on a yellow legal pad the way I always have, the old-fashioned way, and they didn't add up, not even close. So I asked Harriet to set up a direct recurring transfer from my retirement account, the one I'd been building for 30 years straight, to the mortgage servicer for the Ridgecrest property. $3,500 every month, on the first, like a heartbeat. I structured it so it showed on the servicer's end as a supplemental household contribution routed through a family account. Cassie knew I helped here and there. She thought it was occasional. A few hundred for a plumbing issue here, a holiday check there. She had no idea I was covering most of the roof over her head, month after month, because she had enough on her plate, and because I had made a promise to her mother on a hospital pillow that I intended to keep. If you've ever loved someone so much you made yourself invisible to protect them, you already know why I did it. And if you've been on the receiving end of a child who never knew the cost of that kind of love, leave a comment below and let me know where you're listening from. I read every single one. Derek's father was a man named Mitchell Whitmore. Mitchell had made his money in commercial real estate during the Atlanta boom of the 90s. He drove a pearl-white Range Rover, owned a lake house in North Georgia, and treated every family gathering like a press conference for his own success. He had an opinion about everything, and volume enough to fill any room with it. He talked about property values the way other men talk about their grandchildren constantly, lovingly, with an assumption that everyone in earshot cared just as much as he did. In the beginning, Derek kept Mitchell at a comfortable distance from me. We'd exchange handshakes at holidays, make small talk about the Falcons, and go back to our corners. That worked fine for the first couple of years. But then Derek got promoted to senior consultant, and something shifted in him. The good shoes got more expensive. The conversations got shorter. And Derek started measuring everything, including me, against his father. I noticed it in the small things first. He stopped asking how I was doing. He started correcting me in front of Cassie. At Thanksgiving 2 years ago, he laughed when I mentioned I'd been watching a documentary about the history of rural electrification in the South. Dad would never sit still for something like that, he said, meaning Mitchell. He's always got 3 deals running. The implication was clear enough. I let it go. But then came the July 4th weekend at Mitchell's lake house. I want you to picture it. A long deck over the water, paper lanterns strung between the posts, a catered spread of food that probably cost more than my truck. Mitchell holding court at the head of the table with a glass of bourbon in his hand, talking about a mixed-use development he was putting together in Forsyth County. His voice carried the satisfied weight of a man who had never once doubted that his opinion was the most important thing in any room. I was sitting at the far end of the table in my good short-sleeved shirt, the blue one Donna bought me years ago that still fits, eating a piece of cornbread and watching the water. Mitchell turned the conversation toward legacy. He talked about what it means to build something that lasts. He talked about vision. And then, with that easy, practiced casualness that powerful men use when they want to diminish someone without getting their hands dirty, he looked down the table and said, "Some men plant trees. Some men just mow the grass." He smiled when he said it. He wasn't looking at me, but everyone at that table understood exactly who he meant. I kept eating my cornbread. Then Cassie spoke, my daughter. My Cassie, who I had driven to every school play rehearsal and every Saturday swim meet and every college visit, who I had taught to check her tire pressure and read a lease agreement and never sign anything she hadn't read twice. She set down her fork, tilted her head slightly toward Derek, and said, in a voice that carried clear over the sound of the water, "Daddy's always been more of a grass-mowing kind of man. Mitchell built an actual legacy. There's a difference." Derek smirked. Mitchell raised his bourbon glass slightly, like a toast. The table went quiet for a moment. A motorboat moved across the far end of the lake. Someone's child laughed somewhere on the lawn. I set my napkin on the table. I looked at my daughter for a long, still moment, and I said, in a voice as flat and level as a freshly poured slab of concrete, "Then I guess you'd better hope Mitchell's legacy comes with a monthly payment plan." I stood up, thanked Mitchell for the food, walked to my truck, and drove the 2.5 hours back to Savannah without stopping. If this story is landing somewhere real for you, take a second right now to give it a like and drop a comment. It means more than you know, and it helps get these stories to the people who need to hear them. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat on my back porch until almost 2 in the morning, with a glass of iced tea, listening to the insects, thinking about Donna's notepad, thinking about what she would have written on it that night. I think she would have written, "He is still your daughter's father." And then I think she would have written, "Don't you dare write that check again." Monday morning, I called Harriet. "Harriet," I said, "the recurring transfer to the Ridgecrest mortgage servicer. I need to stop it." There was a pause on her end. Harriet has worked with me for 16 years. She knows my whole financial picture. She said, "Ray, if that stops, they're going to fall behind within 60 days. Their cash flow doesn't cover the payment on their own." "I know," I said. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my professional life," I told her. "And I spent 38 years working on live circuits, so that's saying something." She canceled the transfer that afternoon. The first month, nothing happened. I assumed Cassie and Derek had either dipped into savings or hadn't noticed the gap yet. The second month, I got a text from Cassie asking if I'd forgotten to send the household contribution. I replied that I hadn't forgotten anything. She didn't text back. The third month was when the ground started to shake. I was at the hardware store on a Wednesday afternoon, picking out caulk for the bathroom tile I'd been meaning to fix, when I ran into a woman I knew slightly, Patricia Odom, who worked at a title insurance company downtown. We chatted about nothing for a few minutes, and then she said, almost as an aside, "Is Cassie selling the townhouse? I saw a listing come up for Ridgecrest Commons, and I thought it might be hers." I told her I didn't know anything about it. I drove home and looked it up. It wasn't Cassie's unit. But what I found instead When I dug a little deeper through a property records site, was a notice of delinquency filed against the Ridgecrest address, 63 days past due. I closed my laptop and poured myself a glass of water and waited. Cassie didn't come to me first. Of course she didn't. She went to Mitchell. I heard about this later from Derek's younger sister, Brenna, who had always been decent to me, and who texted me one evening with a simple message. Just want you to know what happened. Derek went to Dad for help. It didn't go well. She called me the next day and filled in the rest. Derek had driven up to Mitchell's lake house on a weekday, unannounced, sat across from his father at that same long deck table, and asked for a loan to cover the delinquency, roughly $8,000 for 2 missed payments and penalties. He came prepared with a repayment plan. He had a spreadsheet. Mitchell looked at the spreadsheet, took a sip of his coffee, and said, "Son, I love you, but I don't loan money to people who can't manage their own cash flow. That's not investing. That's charity. And charity doesn't build legacy." Then he excused himself to take a call. Derek sat on that deck alone for 20 minutes before driving home. Brenna told me something else, too, that I hadn't known before. Mitchell's legacy was in serious trouble. 3 of his major commercial projects had stalled, 2 in zoning disputes, 1 in a litigation with a general contractor that had been dragging on for over a year. His line of credit was stretched to the limit. The Range Rover was leased. The lake house had a second mortgage on it that had been quietly restructured twice. The empire that had cast its long shadow over every family gathering was largely a performance. The man who planted trees, it turned out, had borrowed the seeds. It was a Friday evening in late October when Cassie came to my house. I heard her car in the driveway before I heard the knock. She always parks too close to the mailbox, and the gravel sounds different. I was in the kitchen reheating a pot of vegetable soup. I went to the door and opened it. She was standing there in the porch light in jeans and a fleece jacket. No makeup, her hair pulled back the way she used to wear it in high school. She looked younger and older at the same time. She looked like someone who had been crying in the car on the way over and had decided to stop before she got out. "Can I come in, Daddy?" she said. I held the door open and stepped back. She sat at the kitchen table and put both hands around the mug of coffee I set in front of her without asking. She stared at it for a long time before she said anything. "The bank sent a formal notice," she said. 60 days delinquent. They're telling us if we don't cure the default within 30 days, they begin foreclosure proceedings." She paused. "It's $11,000. Between the past due amount and the fees." She looked up at me. "We don't have it, Daddy. We've been living right at the edge this whole time, and I didn't even fully understand that until now." I sat down across from her and folded my hands on the table. "How long did you think the contribution was coming from?" I asked. She blinked. "I thought it was you just helped sometimes, here and there, every single month," I said. "First of the month, $3,500, for almost 3 years. That's more than $120,000, Cassie." The color left her face the way color leaves a room when the sun goes behind a cloud all at once and completely. "Daddy, I didn't tell you, because I didn't want you to feel indebted," I said. "I wanted you to feel stable. I wanted you to have the soft ground your mother and I never had. That was my gift to you." I paused. "But a gift you don't know you're receiving teaches you nothing about its value." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were wet. "I am so sorry for what I said at the lake," she whispered. I don't even know why I said it. I was trying to fit into that world Derek wants so badly, and She stopped. "There's no excuse. You drove 2.5 hours home without saying another word, and I let you, and I'm ashamed of that." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, at the tired around her eyes and the set of her jaw, and the way she was holding that mug like it was the only solid thing in the room. And I made a decision that was one of the hardest I've ever made, which is saying something for a man who once had to disconnect a live panel in a flooded crawl space during a hurricane. "I'm not going to pay the $11,000, I said. She exhaled like I'd taken something from her chest. "And I'm not going to restart the monthly transfer," I said. "Daddy, we'll lose the house." "I know. Derek, he's already stressed to the breaking point. If we lose the house, I don't know what." "Cassie," I said, and my voice was gentle, but it was not soft. If the house goes, the house goes. And what comes after that is real. It's yours. You build it with your own hands, on your own income, in a place that actually fits your life. That townhouse does not fit your life. It fits the life Derek is trying to convince himself he has. She was quiet for a long time. I want you to stay with me here, friends, because this is the part that matters. Go ahead and hit subscribe right now if you haven't. These stories take something out of me to tell, and I share them every week, because I know somebody out there needs to hear them. Here is what I will do, I told her. I went to the counter, pulled the notepad. I keep by the phone, the old habit. Always a notepad, and I set it between us. I will help you and Derek put that townhouse on the market at a price that moves it fast, before the bank forces the issue. You'll clear whatever equity is in it, pay off the delinquency, and walk away clean. Then I will cover the security deposit on a rental, a 2-bedroom, somewhere in your budget on your actual income, not the income you wish you had. I looked at her steadily. And on moving day, I will bring my truck. She looked at the notepad. She looked at me. What about Derek? She said quietly. He's going to see this as failing, in front of his dad. Mitchell Whitmore's Range Rover is leased, I said. His lake house has been refinanced twice. He's fighting 3 lawsuits, and his credit line is maxed. Derek's father is not what Derek thinks he is, and Derek is going to have to reckon with that. Cassie stared at the table. I married him, Daddy, she said. I know you did. And I think if you give him the chance to be a real man instead of a performance of one, he might surprise you. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. But I cannot keep funding a life that doesn't belong to you. That's not love. That's a loan that accrues interest in ways money can't measure. She cried then. Not the practiced, controlled crying of someone managing a situation, but the real kind, the kind that comes from deep down and doesn't care about your mascara or your pride. I let her cry. I heated up the soup and set a bowl in front of her and sat with her while she got through it. I want to say the next 2 months were easy. They weren't. Derek went through a week of real anger at me, at the situation, at the gap between the life he'd imagined and the life they actually had. He and Cassie had some hard nights. She told me about them in pieces. But to his credit, and I want to say this because I believe in giving credit where it is due, Derek did not run. He came with Cassie to walk through the townhouse with the realtor. He was the one who called the listing agent and pushed for the fastest possible sale date. He handled the paperwork without being asked twice. The townhouse sold in 6 weeks. They cleared just enough equity to cover the delinquency and closing costs and have a small cushion left. They moved into a clean, bright 2-bedroom apartment in Decatur in early December. It had 2 bathrooms, big windows, and a rent payment that fit comfortably into their combined income with room left over for savings. Mitchell Whitmore did not help with the move. He was dealing with his own situation. 2 of his commercial projects had officially collapsed. The lender on the lake house had begun restructuring proceedings, and his firm had quietly shed 3 of its largest clients. The empire was contracting. The bourbon and legacy speeches had gotten quieter. I showed up on moving day with my truck and a set of moving straps. Derek met me at the curb in front of the old townhouse in worn jeans and a sweatshirt. A look on his face I hadn't seen from him before, something plain and undefended. He shook my hand and held it a beat longer than usual. He said, "Thank you for coming, Ray." Not Dad, my name. And it felt more honest than anything else we'd said to each other in 3 years. We worked all day, up and down stairs with boxes and furniture, the way men work together when there's nothing left to prove. At the end, the 4 of us, me, Derek, Cassie, and Brenna, who had volunteered to help, sat on boxes in the new living room with the windows open to let in the December air, eating pizza from paper plates. The room smelled like cardboard and fresh paint. Cassie looked around at the smaller space, the one she could actually afford, the one that belonged to her real life, and I watched something settle in her face. Not defeat, something more like relief. She looked at me from across the room and said, "I wish Mama could see this." I took a bite of pizza and looked at the window. "She does," I said, "and she's writing it down." Cassie smiled. It was the first real one I'd seen from her in months. "Here is what I want to leave you with, if you've been kind enough to stay with me this long. Revenge in the movies is loud. It has music under it, and a slow walk away from the explosion. But real revenge, the kind that actually means something, is the quietest thing in the world. It's stepping back. It's letting the person you love collide with reality, instead of cushioning them from it one more time. It's trusting that they are strong enough to survive the collision and become someone better on the other side. Derek and Cassie pay their own rent now. They have a savings account. They are building something that belongs to them. Mitchell's lake house sold at a loss in the spring. His Range Rover was handed back to the dealership. Cassie comes down to Savannah every few weeks now. She doesn't ask me for money. She asks me how my knee is holding up. She asks me to tell her things, how her mother and I used to fix the heat ourselves in our first apartment, how I wired my first service panel without supervision and got it right on the first try, how her grandfather worked a double shift the night she was born so I could take the day off to be in that delivery room. Last month she came alone, without Derek, just for a Saturday. We sat on the back porch in the late afternoon with sweet tea, watching the light change over the neighbor's oak trees. "Daddy," she said after a long quiet spell, "how come you never told me about the payments?" I thought about it. "Because I didn't want you to spend your good years feeling like you owed me," I said. "I wanted you to feel free." She nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now I want you to feel capable," I said, "which you are. You just needed to find out for yourself." She reached over and took my hand, the way she did when she was small, and we walked across a parking lot, and she held it for a while without saying anything else. That's all a father really wants. Not the credit, not the thank you. Just the knowledge that the kid you worked yourself down to the bone for finally knows what she's worth and knows she built it herself. If this story spoke to something in your life, if you've ever loved someone more than they knew and had to choose between saving them and letting them grow, leave a comment below and tell me your story. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and take care of yourselves, because a real life, like a real circuit, doesn't work unless the connections are honest. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is cut the power and let someone learn to work in the dark.